Last week on Something's About to Happen.
Moses was an eclectic collection of so many different mixes, cultures, religious ceremonies, understandings, and gods that they worshipped. He was a collage of many different things. We often say that he was too Hebrew to be Egyptian, too Egyptian to be Hebrew, too up to be down, too down to be up. Couldn't fit in with this group, couldn't fit in with that group. And so he was classically what you call a misfit. But when you are a misfit, you ought to clap for God. Because when you don't fit in with this clique and that club and this group, it means that there's a peculiar place in which you fit. And that place in which misfits fit, we fit in the glory of God. Ephesians 3 and verse 20. Now unto him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly, far above all we ask or think, what? According to the power that worketh where? In you. It's in you. When I got it and the pennies dropped, I refused to judge my life by my outward circumstances, but by my inner sensitivity. Because every time I looked inside, I could see greatness. I could sense greatness. But every time I looked at my poor circumstances, my impoverishment, my lack, my pain, the assaults upon my life, I discountenanced what I felt was true greatness. I discountenanced it. And I accepted what my circumstances suggested to me. That will never be your portion. I said, you will never believe the circumstantial report about your life, but you will believe the inner witness wherein God declares, I have planted greatness within you. Going forward, how does greatness happen? How does it happen? How does God pull greatness out of people? In one instance, he pulls greatness out of people by their associations. So when you see greatness in others, it triggers the greatness in you. So some people's greatness is pulled out of them by being associated with other great personalities. So that as they see greatness in others, it triggers greatness in them to be pulled out. So when you see it in somebody else as an advertorial of what God can do in you, especially since she doesn't have two heads, you figure, well, if God could do it with them, he can do mine with me. And so greatness has an association with it. The example that I will refer to would be Mary and Elizabeth. Both of them are carrying greatness inside their wombs. Elizabeth has preceded Mary in conceiving greatness as a possibility. She is with child, and this child has the great burden and responsibility of being the forerunner of God incarnate. And somewhere in her pregnancy, theologians tell us that she felt the baby had died in her womb because the baby was no longer moving. And 6 months after, her cousin, Mary, now is supernaturally, immaculately, without ever knowing a man, she is with child. She has conceived God incarnate in her womb. Whew. And when you carry greatness, you are likely to disbelieve it. When you carry a great destiny and have a great future, you are likely to disbelieve it. So the angel instructed her from God, go to your cousin Elizabeth. She's like you. She is relative to you, not only by blood, but by circumstance. She also is carrying a great child like you are carrying the greatest child. And go and see her, because your relativity allows some level of sorority, which helps you to build confidence that what I said I am doing, I will really bring it to pass in your life. So she arrives at Mary's door, at Elizabeth's door. And Elizabeth has not felt that baby move in a while. No kicking or moving. But the moment Mary shows up in Elizabeth's house, the baby in Elizabeth's womb starts jumping or leaps inside the womb. Through 4 subcutaneous layers of human flesh, the baby in one womb speaks to the baby in the other womb, and the baby in the other womb that perhaps was dead now comes alive. So the greatness in one was re-triggered by the greatness in the other. This is the dynamic in House on the Rock. We don't attract the high and the mighty. We attract people who have a sense that there's greatness in their future, but they can't see it anywhere around in their lives. When they come into a house like this and they hear the preacher speak, something in their womb starts to leap because of something in the preacher's womb that's also leaping. And there's a connection of unmanifest greatness that's going on between them. And Elizabeth came out with the Magnificat, or a Magnificat, and said some great things. So sometimes it happens by association. Secondly, greatness is pulled out when you're under attack. Greatness happens when you are assailed. For others, their greatness is drawn out by the challenge that they face. They don't even know that they have greatness. But look with me at Judges chapter 14, verse 5b. And behold, a lion roared against Samson. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion like a baby lamb. And he had nothing in his hand. He did it barehanded, and he told not his father or his mother what he had done. Samson did not know he was a lion killer until the lion showed up in his face and said, "Arr!" And all of a sudden, as the lion roared, the father of lions roared inside Samson. If you run away from your troubles and your challenges, if you are apprehensive because of your challenges and your circumstances, you might be avoiding your opportunity for God to pull out the greatness that He put on the inside of you. Can I get a witness, somebody? Perhaps when we run from our challenges and our challenges, we're running from our greatness. Because those guys who do this to you and tell you everything is okay, those are your real enemies. The guy that's going to bring out the best in you is the guy you think is your enemy. The guy that's never going to allow the greatness in you to come out is the guy you think is your friend. For me, it was the challenges of life that pulled something out of me and showed it to the world. May you never run from your challenges. All your challenges. Trouble is often the instrument that God uses to pull out the greatness He put in. He's the one who put it there. He knows how to get it out. He knows who to use to bring it out. He knows what circumstances to employ to ensure that He can get His hand on what He put in you and pull it out till it becomes all of you. So unfortunately for some people, like Jacob, from an early age, the names that they were called, what people called them, defined them. Do you know that there's some of you here that what people have called you for the last 15 years or the first 10 years of your life, in your vulnerable and impressionable time, you have become what they called you? Because when you are impressionable like wet cement, and you lay your hand in wet cement and you allow it to set, it sets just like it was shaped. And the words that people speak to you when you are impressionable, when you are vulnerable, when you haven't formed your ideology and philosophy for life after Christ, my friends, those things can stick with you. This was Jacob's problem. From the moment he was born, he was named scammer, con man, con artist. That was the only nice part of his name, artist. Con artist, 419. And he became what they called him. How people box you and label you often determines how you are shapen. And so here's Jacob. His whole life is messed up because of what they called him. There's some of you here today because of what they have called you. Nicknames, certain labels they used to define you, you've shaped into what they called you. That's what names do. That's why in our cultures, we do not name our children arbitrarily. Every time you call that child, you're calling him that for the rest of his life. So make sure you choose the names wisely. When you label him and define him the way that Jacob labeled his 12 children, be careful about it. That you are aligning with the prophetic destiny of the child and the greatness that God had promised to Abraham and his seed. Hallelujah. And it did not change for Jacob for so long, for many decades, until he met with God at the fjord called Jabbok. And he wrestled with God. And all the time he was wrestling with God, he was wrestling under the identity scammer. You know how, scammer, it's time for bed. Scammer, you got to eat your cornflakes. That's your mother calling you. Scammer, I told you not to touch that. Now, scammer, I'm going to beat you with 6 strokes of the cane. Scammer, you will not scam me again. Scammer. And then you expect him to not be a scammer? So you foolish boy, you're just like your daddy. And you expect him not to grow up as a fool. He may do foolish things, but it doesn't make him a fool. So he meets with God. God wrestles with him, and he discovers that something is happening, and he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And how did God bless him? He changed what they call him. He said, what is your name? He said, my name is Jacob. God said, no, they misnamed you. They gave you the wrong name. That is not how I see you. When your parents named you, they did not consult me. They were speaking their circumstances onto you. Don't have a baby until you are correctly aligned with the atmosphere, the principle, and the standard of God. Because whatever your atmosphere is, that's the atmosphere you're giving to the baby in your womb. Make sure you love the man that you marry and whose child you're going to carry. Otherwise, that negative atmosphere can create some initial problems in the child's life. May God fix them if they happen. And he said to Jacob, he said, you are not Jacob. You are not a scammer. You are a prince. But hold it, I'm a thief. I've become what they said I am. I'm a robber. I'm a scoundrel. I'm a criminal. But greatness is in you. And it is God who pulls it out. And here we see God forcefully, through an encounter, reaching into Jacob and pulling out the greatness, the great prince who prevailed with God and prevailed with man. I pray for you that in this first quarter, for some of you in the first 7 days from today, that you'll have such a powerful encounter with God. That your problems will force you to seek his face and say, God, who am I? Am I single forever? Am I going to be broke forever? Am I going to be a beggar forever? Am I going to be insignificant forever? Will I never become exceptional in anything that brings glory to your name? And hear what God will say. God will change what you call yourself. God will change what they taught you to call yourself. And you will call yourself what he calls you. You'll start to believe what the word of God says that you are. You'll say, I know who I am.
Yes, Lord.
And he said, Jacob, that's who you are. When Jacob woke up out from that circumstance, God had pulled greatness out of him. But he still had to battle because the old nomenclature would always try and fight the new nomenclature. Do you get it? I want to tell somebody this morning, there's greatness inside of you. And for all of you young whippersnappers who are in such a hurry to find greatness, greatness takes time. For God to pull it out, it takes time. Moses spent his first 40 years becoming great in the wrong thing. Spent the second 40 years emptying out all of that greatness. And at 80, anybody 80 here apart from Mama and Mama? At 80, he discovered the meaning of his life. It took him 80 years. How old are you? Where are you hurrying to? It takes time to find out who you really are and what God really put in you. Having a lot of money is not the same thing as greatness. Having cars and boats and yachts and planes, that's not the same thing as greatness. Greatness means exceptionalism. It means significance for what God wants on earth, how he wants to be reflected from earth to heaven. Why did God take the man sent to build Israel out of Israeli culture and plant him for the first 40 years of his life in a very superior civilization called the Egyptian culture. Why? He wanted him to think outside the box, so that when he comes back to his people, he's not thinking in their box. What was their box? Slavery, limitation, poverty. I only get what master says I should get. And if I want anything, I say, mother, may I? He was about to introduce them to a new kind of thinking. And he had to go and learn some of it in Egypt. And then God had to take it out of him and then purify his thinking and show him that I'm about to build a great nation. Just because you didn't make it the first time, take a leaf of Abraham Lincoln's peach. He lost every single election until he won the presidential election after a long trek and a steep climb. Today might not be your day, but your day will come. And don't take what men consider the losses of today to be a loss. It was a lesson, not a loss. Take some value from it, learn from it, and get yourself ready for 2023, 2027. In God's time, it will happen. Moses thought that this is my time. He felt the call of God on his life. He ran out of his house, went to see two Egyptians, or an Egyptian killing a Hebrew, and he killed the Egyptian, thinking he was doing God a favor. He heard the call correctly, but he misinterpreted its value. And the result is he has to become a fleeing felon, a fugitive, on the hit list of Pharaoh. You don't want to be on Pharaoh's hit list and remain in Pharaoh's town. So he left. Let me wind it up. He left, went out of town, and he meets the Midianites. He meets the Midianites, and there with the Midianites, they think he's an Egyptian. When you don't know who you are, the people around you will think that you are what you think you are. So you misdefine you, they misdefine you. And he's there acting like an Egyptian. But he's really a Hebrew, and they like him because he's an Egyptian. Because the Egyptians were the most superior people of the time. And in fact, one of the girls wants to marry him. And they get married, and sooner than later, he starts to throw off the Egyptianism. Because who he really is on the inside, God is pulling it out through his circumstances. And Moses has plateaued. He has accepted that I will never be great, I will never be significant, I'm just going to be a herdsman looking after my father-in-law's sheep. You know, that's the worst kind of existence. And one day, he's not looking for anything, Chukwuka, he's not looking for anything. Just trying to get through the day, and he sees a fire burning. And it's burning a tree, but the tree refuses to burn, yet the tree is on fire. It wasn't the burning tree that got his attention, because trees burn in that temperature all the time in the Palestine. But it was green and on fire. That was what Moses was going to become. A man that would remain fresh, but on fire for God. Burning on, but never burning up. And he looked, and God said, take off your shoes. Because the ground that you stand on, this is a completely different terrain from the terrain you're standing on. You are in heaven whilst you're standing on earth. And he said to him, I have an assignment for you, Moses. You will go back to where you came from, and you will be my deliverer to take my people out of Egypt. Here's a man who was drawn out of his mother's house, drawn out of the Nile. Greatness is about to be drawn out of him so that he can draw Israel out of Egypt. Are you here? You get it? And he says, God, you got the wrong guy. Now, this guy cannot talk. He's stammering. Yet when you read the scriptures, it tells us that Moses was an orator before he became a stammerer. How did he become a stammerer? He was hit on his blind side by a system of problems, starting with his flight from Egypt. And it degraded him to where he was like a beggar to a father-in-law. That he lost all confidence. A man who was, when you're ways up there and your fall is so great, it can traumatize you in a way that you don't recognize who you are anymore. Behind stammering is normally fright that was introduced in the child's infancy. Psychologists will tell you that. He couldn't talk. He said, God, you got the wrong guy. God said, how can you tell the all-knowing God that I've got the wrong guy? Do you think I am you? He said, in fact, I like you because you look like the wrong guy. And when I wanted to hide greatness so that Pharaoh couldn't find it, I hid it in what looks like the wrong guy. If I had to hide it from you, otherwise you would pursue the greatness at 50 instead of at 80. And you would mess up my prophetic calendar in a way I don't want it messed up. Do you get it? It was about timing. And now that time has come, Moses, now is the time. This is the time. And you know the story. Moses eventually acquiesced, but he said, God, you use my brother to speak for me. I still can't speak. And over the period of months, years, Aaron does all the talking. Moses is able to talk to Aaron. But when he sees other people, he starts stammering. And then after a while, Aaron stops talking, and now Moses starts doing the talking. So Moses eventually learned how to speak again. Yeah? And when Moses shows up, Pharaoh is stricken with laughter. This is preposterous. This tramp, I should send you to the executioners for what you did 40 years ago. You said I should do what? Let whose people go? When did they become your people? You. And Pharaoh's looking at the outside. He doesn't know that a few days earlier, there has been an encounter, just like it was for Jacob, where God pulled the great prince out of the great scammer. God had pulled the great deliverer out of the great failure. And the great deliverer is standing before him. And Pharaoh thinks he is greater than the deliverer and the deliverer's deliverer. So here is Moses. Says, Pharaoh, let my people go so that they can serve me, saith the Lord. Pharaoh said, who is God beside me? I'm God. And you want me to let Moses, you've gone mad. Where have you been for the last 40 years? What happened to you? Moses said, okay, let me show you. He took his stick. He threw it down. The stick became a snake. Pharaoh said, Jambres, Jambres. They came with their sticks. They threw their sticks down. They too became snakes. Moses said, snake, eat up. And instantly Moses' snake ate up Jannes and Jambres' snake. And Moses picked back his snake. It became his staff again. So in his hand, he had Pharaoh's power and he had God's power. Because once it has been spoken, twice have we heard. Listen, all power belongs to God. By the way, where does God live? I didn't hear you. I didn't hear you. Cut a long story short, Pharaoh was, waxing, he was forming. Moses took his staff. Remember, Jannes and Jambres' snake is inside his staff. He stretched it over the waters. The waters became blood. Pharaoh said, carry your load and go. As they were going, he said, I've changed my mind. 10 times or 9 times he changed his mind. The last time, Pharaoh was warned by Moses. He said, this time I'm not playing. He said, you have touched God's firstborn. Now God is going to take all the firstborn in Israel out. Your lambs, your rams, your cows, and your firstborn sons. Going to take all. We will not spare one. Pharaoh said, do your worst. Moses never picked up a AK-47. He used his staff. Hear me. I believe the term staff was not incidental. I believe it was deliberate. As great men, don't wait till you become great to find your staff. Moses was a nobody when he took a branch from a tree, severed it from its source, because God will become the new source of that stick. And that stick was his best friend, that he leaned on it as he walked up mountains, trekked through the hills. That stick was his staff. Go and build your staff. You've got to build a team, because that's what you're going to lean on when you go to battle. A man who cannot build a team is no leader. So here's the disruptor, and I end on this note. Israel does not like the guy who is speaking for them. In fact, they feel this guy is going to get us into trouble. The more he talks to Pharaoh, Pharaoh is making our work more difficult. He disrupted their thinking completely. And Pharaoh is disrupted. He's disrupting Egypt, he's disrupting Israel. And eventually, he brings Israel completely out of the box. But just because you come out of the box doesn't mean the box comes out of you. What Moses could not fix, Moses brought them out of the box, but Joshua would bring the box out of them. There were two disruptors, one after the other. They disrupted in different ways. But what I wanted to leave you with this morning is that God is going to pull greatness out of you.